Short and sweet. All right, is this on? Look at that.
Look at that.
Now I sound a little more conversational, or not. So the first question, I thought we'd just start and go around, and when we discuss this backstage, not everyone has to answer every question, and people can, hopefully not interrupt too strongly, but facilitate a healthy discussion so that everyone gets a chance to talk about this. And I thought we'd start just briefly at the top. There's a real question, I think, that some people have been asking of, at what have we changed through time, and we have changed through time, our implementation of the Second Amendment, right? No, I mean, this is one of our constitutionally granted rights, and yet, for instance, that right now, certain things, you can't, sawed-off shotguns are illegal everywhere. Machine guns, automatic weapons are illegal. Is this something that needs to be revisited, or have we reached some line that is sacrosanct? So I thought I'd ask each of just in a minute or two at the most, but each of you to give your opinion on that just from a philosophical point of view, and then we'll get down to more detailed questions. Why don't we start on the right? Tom?
Governor, I represent the State Police Chiefs Association, and the views I express today will be based on the conversations that we've had over the last couple of months, and in fact had our annual conference recently, and had over 90 police chiefs from across the state, as well as a series of discussions by email on these topics. And how the police chiefs are viewing this issue across the state is one of community safety more than anything else. We realize that tonight we're here to talk about gun violence, but our role as police chiefs across the state is to provide for a safe community. And the bills that have been sponsored that we do support, and we'll get into that a little bit later on tonight, really are bills that we believe are bills that can make communities safer over time. There's a lot of other things that need to take place as well, and that's a discussion probably for another time. But as far as reviewing the Second Amendment, that's not something that the police chiefs have taken it upon themselves to do. We believe that as police chiefs and law enforcement officers, it's our duty to enforce the laws that are on the books. And really the issue about the Second Amendment is really left for others to decide, our elected officials, primarily in the courts. So no, we have not taken that issue up, Governor.
Okay, Rhonda?
Thank you, Governor. And I just passed two bills that came out of the State House, and those bills did not infringe on the Second Amendment right. So the bill still will require those who want to own a gun, they can own a gun. And so it doesn't infringe at all. And we tried to make sure that we had a balanced approach when considering all the legislation. So I don't think we need to make any modifications to the Second Amendment. I believe in the Second Amendment, and the bills that have passed does not infringe on that right. It gives the person the right to bear arms and the right to defend themselves.
Thank you, Governor. And I agree with Rhonda. I think there's a balance here. There's always a balance. As the world moves forward, we have to rebalance constantly. The Fourth Amendment concerning search and seizures, when that was written, there weren't automobiles. And so when we created automobiles and then they started being used in crimes, we had to figure out what's the balance between the right of privacy and the requirement for a search warrant and a motor vehicle, which wasn't even contemplated when the founders were crafting the Constitution. So I think that's the same thing with guns, and I think the Supreme Court, obviously, is the arbiter of what the Second Amendment means, and whether we agree with it or don't agree with it, that's the law of the land, as the chief suggested, and it's what we have to implement. So I do think that all of the amendments of the Constitution will be rebalanced on a regular basis because the world moves forward. There wasn't the internet. How does that impact these things? So I do think that we need to constantly have that in view as we go forward, but we have the Supreme Court's case law to rely upon.
And Governor, thank you for being the moderator. Thank you, Larry, and your great crew for putting this on. And thank every person for being here. Colorado is an example, I believe, to the rest of the country on having civil discourse. So thank you for participating, every one of you. Governor, the Second Amendment has not changed. And when it says that we shall not infringe on the right to keep and bear arms, and you find out that if a certain law passes, a firearm that you owned one day is illegal the next day, or features on that firearm are illegal as of the first of the month coming up, to me, that does infringe on keeping that weapon. You had it, it was legal, now it's no longer legal. So I do think we've veered, unfortunately, into some questionable territory and on infringing on the U.S.
So
Constitution.
do you think when we passed laws that said machine guns were illegal, was that an infringement as well?
I wasn't there when that happened.
Well, I'm just saying if you were.
I don't know how that, I don't know if they've ever been legal in the first place. But if you're told that a certain appearing type of weapon, firearm, is legal today but is illegal tomorrow,
Right.
and you can't keep it, is that an infringement or not? I view that as an infringement.
Fair point.
Governor, I think that the spirit of the Second Amendment is alive and well. And I look at the spirit of the Constitution. We are a free country. We practice the religion we want, and we would fight the government if it infringed on the practice of religion. The same with speech, the same with association. The Second Amendment is the amendment that protects all other amendments in our Bill of Rights and in our Constitution. And I think that spirit is very much alive. I disagree with my friend Senator Morse to an extent. I'm not sure we are moving forward as a country, as a state. I think oftentimes we are moving sideways and sometimes backwards, and it's unfortunate. But I think if we try to infringe on that Second Amendment right, if we try to infringe on any freedom, we are moving backwards.
And would you say the same? I'd question the same question when we passed laws that made sawed-off shotguns are now illegal. Was that an infringement?
Well, first of all, machine guns aren't illegal. You can have a machine gun
sorry.
if you have a permit.
Right, you can get
have to
special
apply
permit,
to
but-
ATF to have
Right,
a
but it's
permit.
illegal for the common person to just go into a gun store and buy it.
It's illegal for a gun store to sell it, yes.
Right.
I think it is an infringement. I think it is something that if you talk to people about killing machines, a shotgun is far more dangerous than a machine gun. A machine gun is far more emotional than a shotgun, and so politically it's easier to infringe on the Second Amendment that way.
Okay, fair. Dave?
The very purpose of writing a constitution is for a government to obey it and for certain things to be off limits to a transient 34-31 majority in a legislative body. You don't rebalance the free exercise of religion because at some time people say, well, we're more against religion or we want to restrict some unpopular religion. The whole point of a constitution is some things are off limits to majorities. At the same time, what the Supreme Court has taught us in the Heller decision is that like the rest of the Constitution, not every part of the Second Amendment is an absolute. And so when you look at what is protected as arms under the Second Amendment, it's those that are typically owned by law-abiding persons for lawful purposes. The bills one of the bills that passed the House violates that, getting rid of commonly owned accessories for firearms. Likewise, the Second Amendment says that the interest that is elevated above all others, in the words of the Supreme Court, is the right of self-defense, especially in the home. We've seen some pretty harsh attacks in several bills on the right of self-defense. Our Colorado Supreme Court, way back in 1971, in Lakewood versus Pillow, about a law that restricted the transportation of firearms, said, yes, you can have some rules about how firearms are going to be transported, but the broad prohibitions that Lakewood had put in were unconstitutional because they were overbroad. And similarly, while I think you can require background checks on some firearms transactions, the bill that passed the House is unconstitutionally overbroad and reaches far beyond where the government has the legitimate power to go.
Well, Governor, I just really have to disagree because the bills that passed out of the House, it's happening in other states. I mean, there are 6 other states that have a ban on the high capacity limit. I mean, there's some that has 10, there's some that have 20. The proposal that passed out of the House restricts it to 15. And when I think about the massacres, and when I think about the level of violence that we've seen in the state of Colorado and across our country, our nation, there's a need for us to do something to protect our schools, to protect our kids, to protect our neighborhoods. And I don't think that these high-capacity magazines have a purpose in our community. You know, when I think about what happened in the Aurora Theater, you know, James Holmes was able to go in that theater with a 100-round magazine full with bullets, and in 90 seconds, he was able to murder and kill far too many people. So I think that we do need to do something to address gun violence, and I think this is just one approach to go about it.
Well, I guess Representative Fields, this is an example of how one side of this debate frames things exclusively by looking at misuse. And if you're looking at misuse, well, the misuse of handguns in this country is 1,000 times more deadly than magazines of over 15 rounds. Over half the homicides in this country are perpetrated with handguns. And so if you can say, well, here's a crime or 2 or 3 crimes in which a firearm or a firearm or accessory were used, and that's enough for us to ban it, then that's the case for banning all handguns. But the Supreme Court says, no, that's not the right approach. You not only look at what criminals do, you also look at what law-abiding citizens do. And what law-abiding citizens in this country do, what the Supreme Court is looking at, typically owned by law-abiding citizens for lawful purposes, is they very commonly own handgun magazines up to 20 rounds, rifle magazines up to 30 rounds. The law enforcement organizations I've represented in the Colorado Supreme Court, like the County Sheriffs of Colorado, and in the United States Supreme Court, the 2 major police training organizations, lots and lots of others, are opposed to magazine bans because they know that law-abiding citizens, certainly for standard magazines of 20 on handguns up to 30 on rifles, own those magazines for precisely the same reason that they're so popular for law enforcement. Not because law enforcement's fighting wars, not because law enforcement wants to go hunting, but because these law enforcement officers choose them as the best tools for the only reason law enforcement carries guns, the lawful defense of self and others.
And see, what I'm talking about is massacres, okay? We've had a total of 34 massacres. And out of the 34 that have taken place in our nation, 28 of them have something in common. And the 28, they all had a high-capacity magazine clip in common. And the only thing that was able to save more lives is whenever that magazine was about ready to be done, then someone was able to tackle that person down and we were able to save lives. So my thought and my theory is if we know that the common theory, because we're not talking about handguns, I'm talking about massacres, where people are going into our schools, they're going into our churches, they're going into these sacred places, and they're using high-capacity magazines to kill as many people possible. Now, I believe that assault weapons and high-capacity magazines are intended for military war. They're not intended to be a part of our community.
If they're for war, why do you want police officers carrying them? Police officers are peace officers, not warriors.
Police officers should be carrying that kind of ammunition. They are public safety.
Tom, do you want to take a crack at that?
Yes, Governor. What I would tell you is that during the discussion that we had at the state chiefs meeting, we did not get into the level of detail that the professor is discussing whether or not it's constitutional or not. We feel like that is certainly an issue that will be discussed at a different level. What the police chiefs believe, however, is that by having some type of a ban on magazines, that over time, and it would not happen overnight, and it may take a long time, some of these high-capacity magazines would be taken out of circulation, and it could possibly make it safer for, not only for police officers, but for the general public. That was the discussion that we had, and that's our thoughts. Whether or not it passes constitutional muster or not is really left for others to decide.
Chief, why do your officers carry magazines of more than 15 rounds?
We carry magazines that are 20 and 30 round magazines, and we carry those in order to protect not only ourselves, but the public.
May I ask Representative Fields a quick question?
Sure.
In the 34 massacres that you talked about, in 27, 28, maybe even 30, the individuals were on Ritalin, Prozac, or some drug. Would you also ban those drugs because those folks were on those drugs?
Well, this bill that I propose is not addressing medication. You know, we are going to be probably running some legislation that is going to address mental health, and so that is for another discussion. You know, this bill is to restrict the capacity of a high-capacity magazine to 15 in the state of Colorado.
But if the same logic applies where somebody uses a high-capacity magazine to kill multiple people, but that person is using or is on a particular drug, wouldn't you want to ban that drug just as much as you'd want to ban the magazine?
I don't have the data to support legislation to ban that.
I think actually we already do. You know, the FDA keeps track of drugs, and when it turns out that their side effects outweigh the benefits, then we do outlaw that drug. We do exactly that. So I think, I mean, what I would add to this discussion is there's no question gun violence is a big problem, and we need a comprehensive solution. And there isn't just one single thing that's going to fix this. It's a combination of things, because Professor Kopel makes a good point. There's an awful lot of violence that's done with handguns. We need to address handguns. That's what background checks are about, to make sure that, because we sort of, I think most of us agree that we want to keep guns out of the hands of people that we know they ought not be in the hands of. For example, felons, those that are mentally ill, those that we know would engage in nefarious conduct. How do we figure that out but for a background check? Same thing with the magazines. You know, as the chief suggested, it's not going to solve all of the problems, but it is one part of a comprehensive approach. But I also think, you know, having been a police officer and police chief myself, you know, to suggest that the police are peace officers, absolutely we are, and we keep the peace, but there are many times when we have to run into the danger. We're not defending ourselves. There are many times when we are taking the offense, and that's why the police need the kind of firepower that they need to be able to do what they need to do. But at the same time, that's not necessarily the same kind of firepower that officer needs at home to defend themselves in the very unlikely situation of a home invasion.
Do your officers own magazines over 15 rounds at home, the officers you worked with in the past?
And in the past, no. I mean, we didn't have 20-round magazines. Our magazines carried 14, and there was a 15th in the chamber. And we actually, when I was with the Colorado Springs Police Department, I mean, we just deployed AR-15s. They were relatively new technology in like 1997.
You don't have to date yourself.
I wouldn't go out on a date with me if my life depended on it.
I was actually chief even before then. That's how old I am.
And I honestly don't remember how many rounds were in those magazines, but again, those guns were, in our view, so lethal and so dangerous, we couldn't remove it from the car, and they were only deployed to sergeants. We couldn't remove it from the car without doing a report explaining why we removed it, even if it was just to qualify for it. And there was one time when I actually deployed it, but again, there had to be several people deploying it because my hands are now completely full of this gun, and I can't be hands-on to actually help with the arrest or anything else. And so it very definitely has limitations. Plus, you know, I can't be sneaky with it because you can see me 3 feet more than you could normally see me, whereas with my handgun, I mean, you know, I can keep that thing into where I am much more stealth. So again, with a comprehensive approach, let's not have large magazines, because they do result in just being able to kill very quickly and very easily. Whereas, you know, the police, we can carry plenty of magazines, and in fact we do, and we're even taught. You fire a shot or two when you're in a combat situation, as opposed to just a quick shooting, which most of them are. Reload right now. I mean, I only cranked off 2 rounds, but I want 15 in this gun, and then I put that magazine back in my pouch because it's still got 12 bullets in it, but I don't want to waste them. But at the same time, I want 15 every second I can have 15. When I'm out shooting, I can't be changing, but when I'm back behind cover and I'm concealed, then yes, let's get as many bullets in there as I can. And then again, I'm only going to be able to do that 3 times because I've only got 3 magazines. But it's those kinds of things that, I mean, again, I'm being offensive when I'm doing that, and not defensive and just repelling an attack, because the police, unfortunately, there are many times when they have to go in.
When are the police on the offensive, when they're going in and trying to shoot a bunch of people at once? Which is what Representative Fields says the only thing that anybody owns these magazines for. We've got tens of millions of these in the country, and according to Representative Fields, the only reason anybody buys these is because they want to commit mass murder.
And I don't think that's what she thinks, even though I'll let her speak for herself. But, you know, with a magazine that carries 10 or 15 bullets, load it with 10 or 15 bullets. And if you need to go target shooting and you want to crank off 150 rounds and you don't want to have to reload while you're out there, get 10 magazines and fill each with 15 rounds and put a new clip in and do what you need to do. The police go on the offensive every time there's a burglar alarm. Every time I go into a building when the burglar alarm is going off, I've got my gun at the ready, because theoretically there are burglars in here, and we're also taught, and I don't want to steal the chief's thunder, but +1. You know, if I find the burglar, where's the second one? And if I find the second one, where's the third one? So I'm not stopping until...
And what's the difference between a citizen in his home who's got the burglars coming in?
Well, the difference is that burglars, we didn't find burglars in those burglary cases, except extremely rarely, and even then we didn't have to shoot them. And the burglars that actually come into people's homes, and I've interviewed many of these burglars, you know, the last thing they want is an interaction with people, because they're just trying to take stuff and get the hell out of Dodge.
So then why do the police need 20-round magazines if all the burglars avoid people anyway?
And I'm not arguing that you need 20-round magazines. I did it for many years very successfully with 14 and a 15th in the
So you'd be in
chamber.
favor of a law enforcement ban? What's fair for the goose is fair for the gander. No magazines for these no weapons of war. The Colorado peace officers are not warriors. So no magazines above 15 for anyone.
I would
Would
object
be
to
fair.
Yeah, and I would object as well.
Tom, would you object to that as well? You know, Professor, with all due respect, you lost me on the offensive part of your argument. What I could tell you is that from the
That was
state...
Senator Morse's.
Yeah, I was trying to follow you. I'm not sure that I did. What I would tell you is this. If I could bring it back to the opinion of the chiefs, and that is that we do see, like a lot of the folks up here on this panel, we do see the impacts of what things like Aurora can bring. Yeah, and that was a 100-round magazine, if I understand it right. And when you see something like that, we believe something should be done as well. We looked at the legislation that was proposed, Professor, and to be perfectly honest with you, we thought it made good common sense. And to be honest with you, getting into the discussion of the offensive and the defensive and all that kind of thing, we didn't do as a State Chiefs Association. We felt like it was good legislation, and that is why we supported it. We're put in difficult situations all the time, and we see the impacts of that. And so from that perspective, we thought this was good legislation, and that's why we supported it.